Donald Trump is a liar. Right? We all know this. Hopefully there is no reasonable person left that needs to be convinced of that fact. Donald Trump is a liar. But not just a normal liar who lies when it suits their purposes. He is a compulsive liar. He lies reflexively, even when it serves no function whatsoever. Lying is just a part of his grammar, the same way as verb tense or sentence structure. It's just how he talks. It's hardly even deliberate anymore. But over the time that he has spent elevated to this utterly undeserved position of authority, he has made liars of his followers as well. He has sort of remade their rhetoric in the image of his own. I am not the first to observe that if you go to sort of Trump-centered MAGA social media spaces, you will find them to be absolutely inundated with blatant untruths, which even the tiniest amount of research or fact-checking would easily show to be untrue. But Trump supporters in these web spaces don't seem to care at all. They grant instant and unlimited credulity to anything that seems to back up the position they want to hold, and they like and share without a moment's hesitation. Now, the examples of this are endless, right? But we're going to look at just a few examples here and sort of talk through them. And these are all examples that I have encountered somewhat recently, although some of them do date back a few years. So the first I want to look at is an example of Trump supporters not merely knowingly spreading misinformation, but not misinformation they generated, sort of spreading the meme that they know is probably untrue but can't be bothered to fact check. No, the first example I want to look at is one of Trump supporters directly, blatantly lying in reflexive defense of their leader. So back in October of 2018, this YouTube channel called Be Less Stupid went to a Trump rally in Las Vegas. And at this rally, he asked Trump supporters to name a specific policy action that Trump had taken which had benefited them personally. And the most common answer given at that time, in October of 2018, was the Trump tax cuts, that they had benefited greatly from the tax cuts that he had sort of championed and passed the prior year in 2017. So the interviewer goes on and follows up with them and says, okay, how much money do you think that you've saved under the Trump tax cuts? And some of these people gave very general, vague answers, right? Like a noticeable amount, a substantial amount. Some of them gave more specific figures, like $2,000. And one guy even goes so far as to say that his take-home pay has increased by 14%. So that is a very specific answer, and the answers all range from vague to specific, but they are all a substantial amount of money, right? A noticeable benefit. Now the problem is, as the person in the video points out, that they are all lying. And we know they are lying because even though the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed in 2017, it did not go into effect until the tax year of 2018. And the 2018 taxes would be filed in spring of 2019. In other words, all of these people answering in October of 2018 that they had seen thousands of dollars in substantial amounts from the Trump tax cuts were lying. They had not done the taxes yet for the year that those cuts affected. What they are saying is literally impossible. It can't be true. And the one guy who said that his take-home pay had increased by 14%, at that time, most employers had not yet switched over to the new tax tables, which did have the changes to take-home pay based on income tax brackets. But let's assume that this guy belonged to one of the few employers that had made the switch at that point. The switches, the changes in income tax rates were on the order of 1 or 2%, not 14%. So even in the unlikely case that he had already been affected, it sure as hell was not 14% or anywhere even remotely close to that. These people lied. Now, they do not look like, nefarious, scheming political operatives who are just hanging around Trump rallies waiting to be interviewed so that they can lie to reporters. I don't think that is what's going on. I believe that they did not even consciously think about lying. They just did so reflexively in an almost Pavlovian way. They heard the bell of defending Trump ring, and they just started salivating untruth. And how do you get good people, because these are probably good, average, regular Americans, to reflexively lie on the spot without a second thought? Well, that takes training. And Trump is the one who trained them to do that. So now let's look at a couple of others of the other variety of lie that we were talking about, the knowing spreading of untruth, even if you are not the actual one who created the untruth in the first place. So I saw this image making the rounds on conservative social media the morning of the Capitol rally. It purported to be a picture from January 5th of the crowd that had already gathered the day before. And it was accompanied with various different captions like, look at how many people are there, and tomorrow is when it really kicks off. DC's not going to know what hit it. Stuff like that. And I also, in addition to this, heard an interview with a woman who was at the Capitol riot, who claimed that what she saw was hundreds of thousands of peaceful supporters and only a handful of violent rioters. Now, here's the problem if you haven't guessed it already. There were not hundreds of thousands of Trump supporters at the Capitol rally turned riot. And this image, which is actually an image of a crowd of hundreds of thousands, is not an image from January 5th of Trump supporters gathered at the Capitol. This image actually dates from 2018 during the March for Our Lives rally, which, far from being a conservative pro-Trump rally, was a rally mostly organized by students to protest in support of gun control following a particularly bad spate of mass shootings and school shootings in 2018. In fact, all of the most widely attended and largest rallies and protests in our nation's history have been for liberal, progressive causes, never for conservative causes. The top 5 largest rallies that we've ever had in this country, just off the top of the list here, are the George Floyd rallies, the Earth Day rally in 1970, the 2017 Women's March on Washington, the March for Our Lives, which is the actual march depicted in this image here, and the 2018 Women's March on Washington. And you can go all the way down the list. I think it goes to 20 places, and no item on the list is for a conservative cause. They're all liberal progressive causes. But as you have probably noticed, Trump, and by proxy his supporters, are weirdly obsessed with crowd size. Trump lied about the size of his inauguration crowd. Trump and his supporters constantly have a faux embafflement about how Biden could possibly have won despite having smaller, socially distanced rallies. Crowd sizes seem to be a sore point for them. But this goes beyond a Trump supporter looking at this meme and simply being bad at judging crowd size, right, and spreading it on. It is trivially easy to see at just a glance that this is not a picture of a Trump rally. I knew within a second of looking at it. And how was that? Well, you will notice something missing in this image that is present at every Trump rally. Not just present, but ubiquitous. There are no Trump flags, no Trump banners. Have you seen a single Trump rally that did not have Trump 2020 flags, MAGA flags, Gadsden flags, thin blue line flags, Confederate flags, so many flags and banners? It seems to just be part of their aesthetic, and there's none to be seen here. That should have tipped you off immediately. But did any Trump supporter in any of these groups bother to stop and do even a few seconds of research and fact-checking before spreading this on? No, of course they didn't, because they've been trained not to. Let's look at another one. This image purports to be a quote from Kamala Harris during a speech delivered on June 18th, 2020. Now, you can pause the video if you like and take a moment to read it, but it's very authoritarian, incendiary, and villainous kind of language. Now, if you haven't guessed the punchline already, Kamala Harris never said this. And this isn't simply a case of sort of twisting her words and taking them out of context or paraphrasing them and bending them. This is wholly untrue, completely fabricated bottom to top. And it comes from a political satire website called Bustatroll, which writes outlandish, over-the-top political satire articles for comedy's sake. That is where this originates. And you know how I discovered that? I discovered that by merely Googling the words Kamala Harris speech, June 18th, 2020. That is all it took, and within 90 seconds, I had the answer and found out where this actually came from. It was trivially easy to observe that this language seems a bit out there to simply Google the person and the date and to see that this is false. But this meme has been shared millions of times on conservative social media. At least tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people have read this and believed it to be true. But it's not. It's entirely fictitious. But of course, Trump's supporters do not take the 2 seconds of skepticism that would be required to initially doubt this on its face and then do a tiny bit of fact-checking before spreading it around. And even though I've only shared 3 examples here, as I said before, there are examples everywhere in conservative social media spaces, and they just don't seem to care. Their version of reality is just whatever they will it to be. It's a bad fan fiction version of the world we live in, and that doesn't seem to bother them. And honestly, normally I wouldn't care. I mean, this kind of lying and deception and misinformation spreading would bother me on a personal level because I think that is inherently bad, but on the grander scheme of things, it wouldn't worry me all that much. Except the things that they are lying about, the things that they have been trained to reflexively lie about, are serious, and they have consequences. How many people who were there at the Capitol riot would never have been there if they hadn't spent 4 years being continuously, ceaselessly lied to and manipulated, and themselves in turn becoming liars and manipulators? How many of the people who weren't just at the riot, but actually stormed the building and engaged in potentially treasonous violence would never have done so if they hadn't been lied to and deceived into being whipped into a seditious frenzy? How many people who died that day would still be alive if these lies had not run rampant on conservative social media? These lies have consequences, and I do not know how to make conservatives give a shit whether or not what they say is true. That seems like the kind of thing you should just inherently care about. And if somebody doesn't, I struggle to think of a way to convince them to.